Hi and welcome to Ask GMBN Tech, the weekly Q&A session. You ask the questions in the comments down there, use the hashtag Ask GMBN Tech, and we'll get back to you basically on one of these shows. Now don't forget, if you like this or content is helpful for you, please do hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done it, and tell your friends about us. It's free advice on how to fix your bike, look after your bike, and learn about bikes. Our first question this week comes from Nolene Leaf. It says, Doddy, I've recently upgraded my fork from a Suntour 75mm spring fork to 100mm travel RockShox Recon. After I installed it, I went on a ride, etc. and the steering felt fine, but there was a bit of a clicking noise coming from the headset. I thought it needed more grease, but after putting more in, the issue seems to persist. Also, after re-greasing the bearings, I took it for a ride and noticed some excess grease coming from the bottom of the headset near the fork crown race. It doesn't mean I need a new headset or maybe frame noises from over forking it. It means over forking it by having a fork too long on the bike. Difficult without seeing it, to be honest. Is the crown race installed correctly? That would be my first point of call, but you would notice tight steering if it wasn't. So you obviously got to make sure all of the steering components and part of the headset are installed in the correct order and they're on as straight as they can possibly be. Now I know that you say it's got loose bearings in there, just double checking on this because you obviously get cartridge style bearings that drop into the cups or directly into the frame depending on your headset orientation there, and you get the older style which have bearings typically like a 1/4 inch or maybe sort of 9/16 or something in the actual cups of the frame themselves. If you're missing a few bearings, you could be getting noises there because some of them get stressed and they move around a bit too much. Could be that. The headset could be too tight or it could be too loose. Now, I'm sorry, there are so many different things here. Now, it won't be because your fork is too long for the bike. So jumping up from 75 to 100mm, the actual fork won't be that much different axle to crown. So I don't reckon it is that. It's definitely something to do, I think, with the reassembly of the headset or the condition of the headset. Now, if you're unsure on the amount of bearings in your particular headset, the best thing is to count what's in there, or preferably actually look at them in the cup itself. And there should be enough gap that you can nearly fit a bearing in, but not quite. That's to give them enough room to move. If there's a bigger gap than that, then you've lost some bearings, in which case you'll need to replace them. Kind of difficult to explain. Might have been helpful with a picture in this case, just sort of understand it a bit, but hopefully through process of elimination you can fix that one. Next up is from Tyre Tankard. Loving the content, guys. For me, I love my hardtail for commuting, as it's no fuss for munching up the miles. Is it safe to use car protection products on my bike frame? I was thinking of applying some ceramic paste to keep the muck and crap off my frame. Of course, keeping it well away from the brakes. I mean, there's so many different car products out there. I don't want to stitch myself up and say, yeah, you can, because there will be some products that you don't want to get near, like the more delicate rubbers and things on bikes. But generally speaking, if it's just meant for car bodywork, now I'm assuming it's like a ceramic style spray in place of a wax. Is that correct? If so, I've heard really good things about using that stuff, but I've never used it on a bike and I don't know anyone that has. I don't see any reason why you couldn't use it. Of course, make sure it goes nowhere near your brakes at all, you know, the rotors and the pads. It could well be quite good. I guess it's quite expensive to use, but if you've really got that product for using on your car, why not give it a try? In the past, in fact, even now, I tend to use polishes. Now, Muck-Off uses silicone-based polish, which smells of cherry blossom or something like that. It actually smells amazing. Now, I actually use that on my car as well. I use that on the dashboard and stuff to clean it, and it helps stop like the dust and that just sticking around on the dashboard. But also, it's a polish, so it's super slippery. It makes your pedals slippery, and I've had that accident in the pedals before. So for the same reasons, you obviously want to make sure that when you're doing that stuff on a bike, you don't get anywhere near those braking surfaces. But the polishes I've used them on the down tube before, under the saddle, areas like that where you get a build-up. It can just help things, so I don't see why that wouldn't. Now, you could also use other household products. Regular furniture polish, I'm sure it's got beeswax and stuff in it, would do a similar sort of job. But good. What sort of polishes do people use? Kind of interested. Does anyone else use car-based products? And if so, what style of product and where have you used it on your bike? Let us know down there. Next up is from Zors, or Z900RS. What are your personal favourite tyre setups for trails and why? Okay, well, the two major types of bikes I ride, a cross-country bike and a trail bike. They have different style tyres for different reasons. Now, on a cross-country bike, I want everything to just be as light as possible. So there's always going to be a sacrifice on grip because you can't get that much grip out of a tyre that is that light and it hasn't got a soft, like sticky rubber compound. However, what I look for, bearing in mind that we run Vittoria tyres here, so currently I'm using the Barzo tyre. Sometimes I switch to using a Mezcal on the rear for summer because it is a bit faster, but typically Barzo's front and rear. I really like the XC Racing casing on there, so it's very, very thin, but I am running the trail ones at the time being. Now these tyres work really well for all the conditions I ride in. It's definitely sort of my pick in the range. So if I can only run one tyre on a cross-country bike all year round, it would be the Barzo. When I say all year round, bearing in mind it is wet here quite often, so it's quite open space, it works quite well. Now in other brands, if you wanted some cross-country tyre advice, for example, I'd look at stuff like the Maxxis Recon and Icon as a combo there. They work really well together. There's the Racing Ray and Racing Ralph combos that you can get from Schwalbe. There's loads of options out there, but the Barzo I think is a really good tyre, and if you look at how many cross-country racers using them, well, I think that speaks volumes. Next up, trail tyres. So obviously, again, we're running Vittoria tyres. Fine by me because they make the exact tyres I love using. Now, I prefer a really grippy, aggressive tyre on the front generally, and a faster rolling, firmer compound tyre on the rear. That's like my optimum setup, but I will have 4 tyres I kind of rotate through the year. Now currently I'm using a set of Vittoria Mazza tyres front and rear, and that's an aggressive trail tyre, 2.4 in size with a trail casing. They've got 4 compounds on them, really soft and sticky rubber, but manage to roll pretty fast. In the peak of summer, I'll swap the rear tyre out and I'll swap that for another tyre. I use the Agaro, which is a very low profile, fast tyre, kind of similar in Maxxis terms to the Ardent Race, actually, a similar sort of style tyre. Again, so a little bit slippier out back, but nice and fast, so I like that combo. And in winter, I'll keep the Mazda on the rear, but I have a motor on the front, which is their real wide, aggressive, open-spaced tread tyre. A little bit slower to run, so that's why I don't run front and rear, but it gives you a bit more control on the front. Now, for example, that could be kind of similar to a Schwalbe Magic Mary, that sort of style open tread, or even a Maxxis Shorty, I think their open tread tyre is. So there's lots of options around to you, but that's what I like to default to. Definitely something grippier and more sort of confidence inspiring on the front, and then something a little quicker on the rear. Next up from Phil Dubbs. I got a full sus trail bike in November and I've been riding it ever since. Without a fork shock service. I know it's probably overdue get one, but both my fork and shock, which is a RockShox Recon RL and Monarch RT shock, are still running buttery smooth as the day I got the bike. Because of this, is it worth getting a service anyway? Would I still benefit from that? Because I can't feel anything physically wrong. Okay, well, there's 2 schools of thought here you've got to think about. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that logic would say, well, no, don't do it. But the other one, you've got to look after your investment, because things with small intricate components can get damaged on the inside, and with rear shocks especially, depending on the frame, I've been around a full factory suspension before, and I've seen numerous shocks be damaged on the inside with internal scoring on shafts from flex that's happened in the shock because of other factors like loose bearings or the clevis mount enabling some flex on the rear end. And as soon as you get scoring on the inside, you're going to start damaging the internal components, which you won't necessarily realise to start with. So the advisory tone would suggest, yeah, you're getting things serviced on your bike, so yeah, I would recommend it. But that, of course, is entirely up to you on how you want to do that. Now, something you can do if you want to save a bit of cash is learn the basics yourself. So a fork lower leg service and a fork shock air can service, so you can at least do some minimal stuff, get some grease in there, get them nice and clean on the inside, knowing the condition of them as well by taking apart. And when you start to look at things like damper servicing, that's a bit more extreme, a lot more knowledge and tooling needed for that. Some of them quite specialist, like for bleeding dampers and that. I would recommend going to a suspension tuner for that. But hey, it's going to be up to you. Like I said, 2 schools of thought. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, or protect your investment. I know which way I'd go. Okay, next up from Nibs family. Just getting back into mountain biking, and I'm finding the front wheel is hard to unweight and lift on my bike. I realised it's got quite a long chainstay length, 495. That is very long. What modifications can I make to help with my manuals? I would like a bit more travel in the front end and hoping that would help. Yeah, that will definitely help bring out the front end. You're halfway there basically, so bringing you back to your balance point there. Anything to assist with your sort of fulcrum, which in this case is your rear wheel axle really. So bringing your weight further backwards, you can do that by literally shortening your stem or by having a higher bar. And there's a few different ways you can get to this. So you can either have the stem higher, because at the angle it's at with your steering angle, the higher it is, the shorter it makes your top tube. Now you will be limited by This one's an old one, so you'll have to ignore it, but on a modern day fork, you'll have an amount of spacers that will be under your stem, or they could be on top of your stem. If you're lucky enough and they're on top, remove the stem and put them underneath, so you're basically making a stem higher. So the higher stem can be within reason, the shorter your cockpit is going to be. Perhaps you could have a shorter stem if yours has a longer stem on there, that will definitely help, and a higher rise bar which you can also tilt backwards. Anything to get your weight back will help, but also part of this will be just practice. You will adapt to the bike. However, whatever the bike is, you're going to get used to it over time. It's just the initial like, oh, feels like it's front wheel heavy. But yeah, you are right. Front end up, bring the cockpit back. That will definitely help you on your way. Good luck with that. Next up from Mohammed Ridwan. Been told from a senior mechanic that when servicing a fork, it's best to do it in a dust-free or clean room, not any normal environment. He says for any fork, not specific. Is this true? Can I do it in a normal room that's relatively clean? Well, yeah, in theory, but you don't need to be doing it in like a hermetically sealed room. Just use your common sense. Like, this room is fine for servicing forks in. You wouldn't want to do it in a room where there's loads of woodwork going on with dust going everywhere. Just like you probably wouldn't want to work on your computer in a steam room, for obvious reasons. So just use your common sense. If the room is clean, that's fine. Clean your working area, so any components you remove from the bike, you've got something clean to put them on. I recommend getting something like some kitchen towel or shop towel, lay it down, lay the components down on there so you can inspect them, you can use it to clean them with as well. So just take care. Yeah, it should be clean, but it doesn't have to be like ridiculously clean, like a Formula One workshop. Next up from Justin Locke, I've got the RockShox Super Deluxe Select Plus on the rear of my white G180. When under compression, the initial stroke makes a squelching noise. It doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Is there a reason or even a fix for such an issue? Okay, so there's various noises you can get from rear shocks, and obviously oil passing through shims and pistons is one of them. So you have a positive and negative air chamber inside that shock, and there's what's known as the transfer port. Now, I haven't got anything I can actually show you one. I'm going to throw a clip up from a recent RockShox video, and this is of a front fork internal where you can see an example of a transfer port, and it's essentially where the air can transfer from the positive into the negative chamber. Fluid can also go through that, and it will make a squelching noise basically, and you'll have a very small version of one of those on the inside of your rear shock. Now, if your bike is doing it throughout the travel, like the whole thing is making that sort of noise, then it does suggest that some air has got on the wrong side of the IFP, which is the internal floating piston, and it's mixed with some of the oil. It's called cavitation when that happens, and if that has happened, it's no biggie, but it will need a basic service on the inside there just to get that air out there and make sure there's only oil in that place. And last question, how do I measure the stroke on my coil shock? Okay, well, there's a few ways you can do this. If I reach over here, I've got a coil shock with no coil on it. So the first thing you can do is remove the actual spring. Yeah, and then you want to compress the shock. This one might be quite hard, it's got a lot of compression damping on, but you can compress it all the way and measure how far. But also, look on the actual shaft. This one says 55mm on it. That's how much stroke it has, so you know that. Once you work that out, you can then measure your eye to eye, which is the two mounting points for the shock, and when it's on your bike, you can subtract an amount to work out a percentage for sag. Fairly easy, we've made a video on that, just requires knowing how much stroke it has in the first place. And if you're still unsure, check on the manufacturer of the shock, should have detailing on the shock for you to find out, or if it came on the bike that you're asking about, if you look at the spec on the website, quite often they will tell you it's like a 230 by 60 or a 62 or whatever it might be, and that number is referring to the stroke on there. So good luck, and there we go, and that's all the questions we have for this week. As I said, don't forget to give us a subscribe, give us a like, share us around, and get your questions in for next week. See you soon.